I stood in the middle of what used to be my family's cattle pasture, watching strangers in hard hats measure my land. These people were not surveyors. They were not government officials. They were developers, and they were acting like they owned my 15,000-acre ranch. The woman leading them was Corinne Matthews, president of the Sunset Hills HOA. She walked across my property like she owned it, pointing at my barn, my fencing, my water wells. She turned to me with a smile that made my skin crawl. "This is all ours now," she said, waving a stack of papers in my face. "Legal sale, tax lien, you can pack up and leave." That was the moment I realized these people had not just stolen my land. They had stolen my entire family legacy. 3 generations of blood, sweat, and sacrifice, gone in what they claimed was a legal transaction. But here is the thing about trying to steal from someone who has nothing left to lose. That is when I realized. They had no idea who they were messing with. My name is Jake Morrison, and I am a third-generation ranch owner in East Texas. My grandfather bought this land back in 1947 when it was nothing but scrub brush and wild cattle. 15,000 acres of rolling hills, oak trees, and prairie grass that stretched as far as you could see. Grandpa Morrison was a tough man who survived the Great Depression and World War II. He came home from the Pacific Theater with nothing but a Purple Heart and a dream to build something lasting. He worked 3 jobs for 5 years to save enough money for the down payment on this ranch. My father expanded the operation in the 1970s. He added the guest ranch business, built the main lodge, and started our conservation programs. Dad taught me that this land was not just property. It was responsibility. We were stewards of something bigger than ourselves. When I inherited the ranch 10 years ago, I promised to honor that legacy. I modernized our cattle operations, upgraded our facilities, and maintained the same conservation practices my family had followed for decades. Every morning, I would ride out to check on our herds as the sun came up over the eastern pastures. Every evening, I would walk the fence lines my grandfather had built with his own hands. This ranch was not just my home. It was my identity, my purpose, my connection to something eternal. The guest ranch brought families from all over Texas to experience authentic ranch life. Children who had never seen a real cow would leave here understanding where their food comes from. City folks would spend a week learning to ride horses and round up cattle, going home with stories they would tell for the rest of their lives. But in the past decade, things started changing around us. Suburban developments began creeping closer to our borders. What used to be farmland and forest became cookie-cutter neighborhoods with names like Meadowbrook Estates and Sunset Hills. At first, the new neighbors seemed friendly enough. They would wave when they drove past our entrance. Some even brought their kids to our pumpkin patch every October. The Sunset Hills development was the largest, with over 200 homes and a golf course that bordered our southern fence line. The HOA president was a woman named Corinne Matthews. She was maybe 50 years old, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. Corinne would occasionally stop by to chat about neighborhood issues. She always seemed interested in our land use policies and future development plans. "You have so much unused land here," she would say, looking out over our pastures. "It seems like such a waste for cattle when families could be living here." I always politely explained that this was working ranch land, protected by agricultural zoning and conservation easements. But Corinne would just nod and smile that cold smile of hers. "Things change," she would say. "Nothing stays the same forever." I should have paid more attention to those words. I should have seen the warning signs. But I was focused on running my ranch and taking care of my cattle. I trusted that my legal ownership was solid, my taxes were current, and my property rights were protected by law. I had no idea that trust was about to cost me everything. It was a Tuesday morning in March when my world came crashing down. I was having coffee on my front porch, watching the sunrise paint the eastern hills gold, when a county sheriff deputy pulled up my driveway. "Jake Morrison?" he asked, stepping out of his patrol car. "That would be me," I replied, setting down my coffee mug. He handed me a thick manila envelope. "Legal documents, sir. You need to sign here." My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside were official court papers claiming that the Sunset Hills HOA had purchased my entire ranch through a tax lien sale. According to these documents, I owed 3 years of back taxes totaling $47,000. "This is impossible," I told the deputy. "I have never missed a tax payment in my life." But there it was in black and white. Official county records showing unpaid property taxes dating back 3 years. A legal notice of tax lien sale that I had supposedly ignored. And a certificate of sale transferring ownership of my 15,000 acres to the Sunset Hills Homeowners Association. The deputy shrugged. "I just deliver the papers, sir. You will need to take this up with the county." After he left, I raced to my office and pulled out my tax payment records. Every single year, I had paid my property taxes in full and on time. I had receipts, canceled checks, and confirmation letters from the county tax office. Something was very wrong here. I drove straight to the county courthouse, my truck engine racing as fast as my heart. The tax assessor office was on the second floor, a cramped space that smelled like old paper and government bureaucracy. "I need to see my tax payment history," I told the clerk behind the counter. She typed my name into her computer and frowned. "According to our records, you have outstanding taxes going back 3 years. The total amount owed is $47,215. "That is impossible. I have receipts right here." I spread my payment records across her desk. Canceled checks made out to the county tax office. Receipt stubs showing full payment. Bank statements proving the money had been withdrawn from my account. The clerk examined my documents with growing confusion. "This is strange. These receipts show payments, but our computer system shows no record of receiving them." "What does that mean?" "I honestly do not know, sir. You might want to speak with our supervisor." The supervisor was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. He studied my documents for several minutes before shaking his head. "Someone has been intercepting your tax bills," he said finally. "These payments you made were never credited to your account." My blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" "I am saying someone has been stealing your tax bills before they reached you, then creating false documentation to make it look like you were not paying. This is fraud, Mr. Morrison. Serious fraud." I left the courthouse in a daze. Someone had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to steal my ranch, and they had almost succeeded. If I had not kept meticulous records, I would have lost everything without ever knowing what hit me. That afternoon, I called Sarah Rodriguez, the best property attorney in East Texas. Sarah was a fighter, a woman who had built her career defending landowners against corporate bullies and government overreach. "Jake, what you are describing is criminal conspiracy," she said after reviewing my documents. "This was not some clerical error. Someone planned this theft very carefully." "Who would do something like this?" Sarah's voice turned grim. "Someone who wanted your land badly enough to commit multiple felonies to get it. We need to find out who is behind this, and we need to do it fast." Within hours, Sarah had filed emergency motions to halt any development or transfer of my property. But as we dug deeper into the public records, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Corinne Matthews was not just the HOA president. Her husband owned the development company that had been surveying my land, and the county tax assessor who had signed off on the fraudulent lien sale was Corinne's brother-in-law. This was not random crime. This was organized theft, and it went all the way to the top. Our first court hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Sarah and I arrived early, armed with boxes of evidence and a determination to expose the truth. The courtroom was packed with spectators, including several members of the local media who had gotten wind of the story. Judge Patricia Coleman was known for running a no-nonsense courtroom. She listened carefully as Sarah presented our evidence of fraud, her face growing more serious with each document we submitted. "Your Honor," Sarah argued, "the evidence clearly shows that Mr. Morrison's tax bills were systematically intercepted and his payments were never properly credited. This alleged tax lien sale is based on fraudulent records." But when Corinne Matthews entered the courtroom with her legal team, I knew we were in for a fight. She had hired Gibson, Walsh, and Associates, the most expensive law firm in the county. These were the lawyers who represented oil companies and shopping mall developers. Corinne's lead attorney was a man named Richard Gibson, a shark in a $1,000 suit who specialized in making problems disappear. He stood before Judge Coleman with the confidence of someone who had never lost a case. "Your Honor, my client purchased this property through a completely legal tax lien sale. All proper procedures were followed. All notices were sent. If Mr. Morrison failed to pay his taxes, that is his responsibility, not ours." Judge Coleman looked skeptical. "Mr. Gibson, the plaintiff has presented compelling evidence that the tax records were falsified." "Allegations, Your Honor. Mr. Morrison's receipts could have been fabricated after the fact. Our purchase was legitimate and final." I wanted to jump out of my seat and scream. These people had stolen my ranch through an elaborate fraud, and now they were claiming I was the one lying. But the worst was yet to come. Gibson presented documents showing that Corinne's development company had already invested over $2 million in surveying, planning, and initial site preparation for a luxury subdivision on my land. They had architectural plans for 96 custom homes, each selling for over $300,000. Revering this sale now would cause irreparable harm to my client's business interests, Gibson argued. They have relied on the validity of this purchase in good faith. Good faith, I nearly choked on those words. Judge Coleman studied the documents for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she spoke. "I am going to issue a temporary restraining order preventing any further development of this property while we sort out these allegations. But I want both sides to understand that this is a complex matter with serious financial implications." It was a partial victory, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. Corinne Matthews had come prepared with an expensive legal team and a well-constructed story. Meanwhile, I was just a rancher fighting for his family land. As we left the courthouse, Sarah pulled me aside. "Jake, we need more evidence. These people have money and connections. If we are going to beat them, we need to prove this conspiracy beyond any doubt." That night, I could not sleep. I walked the fence lines of my ranch, looking out over the land my grandfather had fought to build. In the distance, I could see the lights of the Sunset Hills development, a reminder of how close suburban sprawl had crept to my property. Corinne Matthews thought she could steal my legacy and get away with it. She thought her money and connections made her untouchable. She thought wrong. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and I worked 18-hour days building our case. We interviewed county employees, traced financial records, and mapped out the conspiracy that had nearly cost me everything. What we discovered was worse than either of us had imagined. Corinne Matthews and her network of conspirators had not just targeted my ranch. They had been systematically stealing properties across 3 counties for over 5 years. Small farms, family businesses, even residential homes had fallen victim to their tax lien scheme. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had gotten greedy, and they had targeted the wrong person. I was not going to roll over and let them steal from me. I was going to fight back, and I was going to make sure they paid for every family they had destroyed. The war was just beginning. 3 weeks after our first court hearing, Sarah burst into my ranch office with news that changed everything. "Jake, the FBI is involved now. They want to meet with us tomorrow morning." Special Agent Maria Santos was a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in public corruption cases. She sat across from us in Sarah's conference room, her notepad filled with details about our case. "Mr. Morrison, what happened to you was not an isolated incident. We have been investigating Corinne Matthews and her associates for the past 6 months." She opened a thick file folder and spread photographs across the table. Property records, bank statements, and surveillance photos of Corinne meeting with various county officials. In the past 5 years, this criminal network has stolen over 50 properties using the same tax lien scheme they used on you. Farms, ranches, small businesses, even family homes. The total value of stolen property exceeds $100 million. I stared at the photos in disbelief. How is that possible? Agent Santos explained that Corinne's operation was more sophisticated than we had realized. Her husband's development company was just the tip of the iceberg. They had created a network of shell companies, fake businesses, and corrupt officials that operated like a criminal enterprise. Corinne Matthews is not just an HOA president. She is the ringleader of an organized theft operation that has been stealing property across East Texas for years. The scheme worked like this. Corinne would identify valuable properties in rural areas where development was possible. Her brother-in-law at the county tax office would falsify records to show unpaid taxes. Meanwhile, Corinne's people would intercept the real tax bills before they reached the property owners. After the fraudulent tax lien sale, Corinne's development company would swoop in and purchase the property for pennies on the dollar. They would then develop the land or resell it for massive profits. The Morrison Ranch was going to be their biggest score yet, Agent Santos explained. 15,000 acres worth approximately $30 million, purchased through a fraudulent lien sale for $47,000. But the FBI had been building a case against Corinne for months. They had wiretaps, financial records, and testimony from former county employees who had finally decided to come forward. We have recordings of Corinne discussing the details of the fraud. We have bank records showing bribes and kickbacks to county officials. We have testimony from victims across 3 counties. Agent Santos played a recording that made my blood boil. It was Corinne's voice, clear as day, discussing the Morrison Ranch theft with her husband. "The old man will never know what hit him. By the time he figures out what happened, we will already be building houses on his land." Her husband's voice was equally cold. "What if he fights back? He is just a rancher. These people do not have the money or connections to challenge us in court. We have done this 50 times before. He will fold like all the others." I clenched my fists as I listened to them plan my destruction. These people had stolen from dozens of families, ruined lives and destroyed legacies, all for their own profit. But Agent Santos was not finished. She pulled out another stack of documents that made my jaw drop. Corinne Matthews and her co-conspirators were arrested this morning in coordinated raids across 3 counties. Her husband, her brother-in-law at the tax office, 2 county commissioners, and 5 other associates are all in federal custody. I could barely believe what I was hearing. They arrested all of them. The charges include conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, bribery of public officials, and racketeering. These are serious federal crimes that carry lengthy prison sentences. Sarah leaned forward in her chair. What does this mean for Jake's property? All fraudulent property transfers are being reversed immediately. Mr. Morrison will have his land back within the week, but that is not all. Agent Santos smiled for the first time since we had met. Under federal asset forfeiture laws, all property purchased with proceeds from this criminal enterprise is subject to seizure. That includes Corinne Matthews' mansion, her husband's development company assets, and all real estate owned by their co-conspirators. My mind raced as I processed this information. Not only was I getting my ranch back, but the people who had tried to steal it were losing everything they owned. There is one more thing, Agent Santos added. As the victim who brought this conspiracy to light, you will be eligible to file civil claims against all seized assets. Essentially, you can sue to take ownership of their property as compensation for what they tried to steal from you. I looked at Sarah, who was grinning like she had just won the lottery. Justice was finally coming for Corinne Matthews and her criminal network. But the best part was yet to come. The criminal convictions came faster than anyone expected. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of decades in federal prison, most of Corinne's co-conspirators agreed to plea deals in exchange for testimony against the ringleaders. Corinne Matthews herself was defiant to the end. She refused to accept a plea bargain and insisted on going to trial, convinced that her expensive lawyers could find a way to beat the charges. She was wrong. The trial lasted 3 weeks and was covered by news media across Texas. Every day, more evidence was presented showing the scope of Corinne's criminal enterprise. Recordings of her planning thefts, bank records showing bribes to county officials, testimony from dozens of victims who had lost their homes, farms, and businesses. The jury took less than 4 hours to find Corinne Matthews guilty on all counts: conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, bribery, and racketeering. Her husband received similar convictions, as did her brother-in-law and the other county officials involved in the scheme. But the criminal convictions were just the beginning. Under federal law, all assets purchased with proceeds from criminal activity are subject to forfeiture. That meant Corinne's $2.3 million mansion, her husband's development company, and all real estate owned by their co-conspirators were now property of the federal government. Sarah filed motions on my behalf to claim these assets as compensation for the attempted theft of my ranch. It was a rarely used legal procedure, but the law was clear. Victims of criminal conspiracy were entitled to full restitution, including seizure of the criminal's assets. Corinne's lawyers fought back desperately. They claimed that Corinne's mansion was owned by her husband, who should be considered an innocent spouse. They argued that the development company was a legitimate business that should not be subject to forfeiture. Judge Coleman was not impressed by their arguments. The evidence clearly shows that this entire criminal enterprise was designed to steal property from innocent victims, she ruled. All assets derived from this conspiracy are subject to forfeiture, and Mr. Morrison is entitled to full compensation for the attempted theft of his ranch. The court order was sweeping and final. Corinne Matthews would lose her mansion, her cars, her bank accounts, and all other assets. Her husband's development company would be liquidated, with all proceeds going to compensate victims of their crimes. But the most satisfying moment came when I was legally allowed to take possession of Corinne's house. It was a Tuesday morning in October when I drove up to the front gate of Corinne's exclusive neighborhood. The same woman who had walked across my ranch like she owned it was now being forced to vacate her own home with nothing but personal belongings. Corinne stood on her front lawn, surrounded by suitcases and boxes, waiting for a moving truck that would take her to a small apartment across town. Her perfect blonde hair was disheveled, her expensive clothes wrinkled from packing. When she saw me pull up in my pickup truck, her face twisted with rage. "This is not over," she screamed. "I will appeal this decision. I will get my house back." I rolled down my window and looked at her calmly. "Corinne, this house was purchased with money you stole from honest families. You are getting exactly what you deserve. You cannot do this to me. I have rights. So did all the families you destroyed. So did I when you tried to steal my ranch." Corinne's husband appeared in the doorway, his face pale and defeated. The man who had once planned to build 96 houses on my stolen land was now homeless himself. "Please," he said, "we have children. We need somewhere to live." I felt a moment of sympathy for their children, who were innocent victims of their parents' crimes. But then I remembered all the other families Corinne had destroyed, all the children who had lost their homes because of her greed. "You should have thought about that before you decided to steal from people," I replied. Within hours, Corinne and her family were gone. I stood in the doorway of their former mansion, looking at the marble floors and crystal chandeliers that had been purchased with stolen money. But I was not interested in keeping this house. I had something much better planned for it. 3 months later, I stood on the steps of the county courthouse as dozens of people gathered for the public auction of Corinne Matthews' seized assets. News cameras rolled as the auctioneer prepared to sell the mansion and other properties that had been purchased with stolen money. But before the auction began, I made an announcement that surprised everyone. "Ladies and gentlemen, as the victim who brought this criminal conspiracy to light, I have decided to donate all proceeds from today's auction to the East Texas Legal Aid Foundation. This money will help other families fight similar property theft schemes." The crowd erupted in applause. Many of the people present were victims of Corinne's crimes who had come to watch justice being served. Corinne's mansion sold for $2.1 million. Her husband's luxury cars brought in another $300,000. The development company assets were liquidated for over $5 million. Every penny went to establish the Morrison Property Rights Defense Fund, a legal aid program that would help rural property owners fight corruption and theft. Corinne Matthews was not present for the auction. She was beginning her 15-year sentence at a federal prison in Fort Worth, along with her husband and the other conspirators who had participated in their criminal enterprise. Her appeals had been rejected at every level. The evidence against her was simply too overwhelming to challenge. But the most satisfying moment came 6 months later when I received a letter from the federal prison system. Corinne Matthews had requested to meet with me, claiming she wanted to apologize for what she had done. I drove to Fort Worth on a cold January morning, curious to hear what she had to say. The federal prison was a grim concrete building surrounded by razor wire and guard towers. Karen looked smaller somehow, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of her expensive designer clothes. "Jake, I want you to know that I am sorry for what I did," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I studied her face, looking for any sign of genuine remorse. "Are you sorry you did it, or are you sorry you got caught?" Karen's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw the real woman underneath. Angry, bitter, and completely unrepentant. "You destroyed my life," she hissed. "My children have to live with the shame of what their mother did. My husband lost everything because of you." "Because of me?" I stood up from the table. "Karen, you destroyed your own life when you decided to steal from innocent families. You destroyed dozens of lives before you tried to steal from me." "I was just trying to provide for my family." "By stealing from other families, by destroying other people's legacies." Karen's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of self-pity, not genuine remorse. "You do not understand the pressure I was under, the money problems, the expectations." "I understand perfectly. You were greedy, you thought you were above the law, and you picked the wrong person to steal from." I walked toward the door, then turned back one final time. "Karen, you are going to spend the next 15 years in this prison. Use that time to think about all the families you hurt. Use it to become a better person. Because when you get out, the world will be watching to see if you learned anything from this experience." As I drove away from the prison, I felt a deep sense of closure. Karen Matthews and her criminal network had been brought to justice. Their victims had been compensated, and new safeguards were in place to prevent similar crimes in the future. But the best part was still to come. 2 years have passed since Karen Matthews tried to steal my ranch. As I write this, I am sitting on my front porch, watching the sunrise paint the eastern hills gold. The same view my grandfather enjoyed when he first built this house 75 years ago. My ranch is thriving like never before. The publicity from the case brought national attention to our guest ranch business. Families from across the country come here to experience authentic ranch life and hear the story of how we fought back against corruption. I used part of the money from Karen's seized assets to expand our operations. We built new guest cabins, upgraded our facilities, and hired additional staff. The ranch now employs 22 people from our local community, providing good jobs in an area that desperately needed economic development. But more importantly, the Morrison Property Rights Defense Fund has helped over 100 families fight similar property theft schemes across Texas. We have recovered stolen homes, prevented fraudulent foreclosures, and exposed corruption in county governments throughout the state. The fund employs 3 full-time attorneys and 2 investigators who specialize in property rights cases. They work with families who cannot afford expensive legal representation, leveling the playing field against wealthy criminals who prey on honest citizens. Karen Matthews remains in federal prison, serving her 15-year sentence. Her husband was released after 7 years but lost his development license and filed for bankruptcy. The corrupt county officials involved in the scheme were all convicted and removed from office. New procedures have been implemented to prevent similar crimes. Property tax notices are now sent by certified mail with tracking numbers. All tax lien sales require independent verification and a waiting period for challenges. County officials must disclose any financial relationships with property developers. Most importantly, the state legislature passed the Morrison Property Protection Act, which requires enhanced penalties for property theft schemes and provides additional legal protections for rural landowners. But the real victory is not measured in money or legal changes. It is measured in the families who still have their homes because someone stood up to corruption. It is measured in the children who will grow up on their family land because their parents had the legal help they needed to fight back. Every morning when I ride out to check on my cattle, I think about my grandfather and father. They built this ranch through honest work and sacrifice. They trusted that the law would protect what they had earned. That trust was almost betrayed by criminals who thought they could steal with impunity. But in the end, the system worked exactly as it was designed to work. Truth prevailed over lies. Justice triumphed over corruption. And honest people proved that they will not be victimized without a fight. Corinne Matthews thought she could steal my family legacy and get away with it. She thought her money and connections made her untouchable. She thought I was just another victim who would fold under pressure. She was wrong about all of it. The ranch that my grandfather built with his own hands is still here. The land that my father protected is still in our family. And the legacy that 3 generations of Morrisons built will continue for generations to come. Sometimes the system fails honest people. Sometimes corruption wins and criminals get away with their crimes. But not this time. This time, justice prevailed. And that makes all the difference in the world.